What is an epistolary style of writing? That is, when a story is composed entirely of letters, diary entries, or these days, even emails or blog posts. That is known as epistolary style of writing. The most famous authors of epistolary novels include Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Charles Lamb made me laugh during the German occupation, especially when he wrote about the roast pig. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society came into being because of a roast pig, which we had to keep secret from the German soldiers. So I feel a kinship to Mr. Lamb. An excerpt from the Guernsey Literary Potato Peel Pie Society, a book of classic epistolary goodness. And discussing it today with us is Suhani.
Hi, my name is Suhani and I'm 15 years old. I enjoy reading and all things creative. I love making music by playing guitar, hearing music, and I love talking as well.
All excellent characteristics. It's been a while since you were here before, Suhani. So let's get you right back into the game. And let's start with the name. Can you say the title of the book without referring? Let's see if you can get it right.
The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. Was that correct?
You've got the name bang on. And I had to check to make sure you were right. I guess if we are doing this, it would be prudent to explain the title before we start.
The title of the book is the name of a book club which was an excuse to avoid getting arrested when John, Elizabeth, Dorsey, Amelia broke curfew during the World War II, which is also how it came into being.
It's an interesting beginning to a literary society, isn't it? Actually, the whole book is really interesting and slightly different from most novels we tend to read these days, particularly because of letters or the trail email of that generation. What can be the equivalent today? A WhatsApp chat? Can it qualify to form a book?
The book looks like a trail email of that generation. And as you're asking what can be equivalent today, I believe it would be trail email again. WhatsApp chats I don't think qualify. They are too short, too concise. Sometimes comprising only plasticky emojis which nobody knows what they mean. Or at least I do not know what they mean. However, I still think that letters would be best to read a story when you can make out something of the author by their sloppy or neat handwriting. Read more into the context by what is scratched out deliberately and that last line that author says goodbye, a dried blot which I imagine could have been a teardrop. All this could be conveyed only by letters.
Yes, sometimes you just want to read something flowery, elaborate, and personal, rather than a deletable and easily written WhatsApp chat. The emotion of reading a letter is something else entirely, and it allows you to get a look into the author's world. Speaking of authors and letters, it took me some time to build a communication chart between all the varied channels and the cast. Who is talking, or rather writing, to whom, who is whom. And then once I established the characters, then the letters slotted themselves in the story timeline. What was your experience?
It was a bit confusing at first to understand and keep track of all of the characters, but as I continued to flip through the pages, they got more individualized and put together. For me, it was like getting to know a person, meeting them for the first time as strangers, knowing nothing about them, to knowing every small detail. I felt like the characters in the book were real people, the same as I'm sure what the author felt while writing the book.
The way the characters gradually start to come to life is probably one of my favorite parts of reading a book. And I'm sure it's a far better experience for the author when they feel the same thing about the fruit of their pens. Once you finish this book, you end with a feeling of wonderment. That feeling when someone next to you tells you to close your mouth. You feel amazed at the dexterity with which the characters are carved just by the flow of letters and language, and how fluidly the story flows with an instrument as disjointed as intermittent letters. Did you also have to be told to shut your trap?
The novel's epistolary form personalizes the characters, allowing for multiple perspectives to unfold and highlighting significant character tones and quirks. The epistolary form is also convenient for longer stories about the past, enabling the characters to tell those stories in their own words. Character stories dating back to the 1940s are just as commanding as the present events of post World War II life in 1946. Juliet's character is almost instantly appealing through the sardonic tone in her early communication with her publisher and other friends. As further correspondences unfold, the most honest versions of the characters are revealed. Mark Reynolds' arrogance, Adelaide's meanness, Isola's naivety, and Sydney's magnetism. Everything shines through the letters.
Well said. Couldn't have put it better myself. I like the way you've distilled certain characters into their personality traits because I think that people, when they're corresponding with each other, like to push a certain trait of theirs, like being kind or being magnetic, like you said, which means that a certain character will come out more throughout a letter, more than it would in a conversation. A small channel island is the canvas on which the characters are painted, portraying their own lives. A not so distant backdrop of World War II lets the character of the characters to shine. How would you explain the plot?
Beginning early 1946 in London, Juliet Ashton, a British writer and former war journalist, is emerging from the ashes of the war to rebuild her life and her identity. She has lost her home and all her possessions, most regrettably her book collection. Out of the blue, she responds to correspondence started by a resident of Guernsey who has managed to obtain a second hand book once owned by Juliet, in which she had long ago written her name and address. Through this initial contact, Juliet meets an entire community, and the course of her life is redirected. Charming, funny, sweet, and thoughtful, the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society is a story that women might find more appealing than men. Yet, it is unflinching in its wartime recollections. The deprivations and devastation of time are imaginatively and convincingly conveyed. At its core, this is a book about the love of reading and the magic of books.
It is a charming backdrop and a charming main character, which ensures that the book is never dull and always fun to just read through. Despite that, like you said, it does not flinch away from the horrors of war and tackles them in a spectacular manner. Also, the way the books are read and loved just sends a warm feeling through my heart. It's like Mary Ann says. That's what I love about reading. One tiny thing will interest you in a book, and that tiny thing will lead you to another book. And another bit there will lead you on to a third book. It's geometrically progressive, all with no end in sight, and for no other reason than sheer enjoyment. It's like an addiction. It's like opium. So, what's your opium? Why do you read? And does Bookbibuli help in maintaining that high?
My opium is science fiction. I like reading because it feels like something is missing if I don't read. I love being in people's heads, and reading fills a void in me that I never knew existed. Whenever I feel lonely and in need of comfort, I turn to my books. I receive no judgment from them, and through books, I live other people's lives better than they've lived theirs. Sometimes, getting lost in a story is what I feel I need to keep sane. I can forget I ever existed in the first place and just be. The feeling of comfort I get after connecting to a story I feel like it's etched into my soul forever. About Bookbibuli, yes, I think they do. I think their podcasts help us a lot in choosing the right book. Learning about the book beforehand initiates interest in a particular book.
I don't want to be considered a light-hearted journalist anymore. I do acknowledge that making readers laugh, or at least chuckle, during the war was no mean feat, but I don't want to do it anymore. I can't seem to dredge up any sense of proportion or balance these days, and God knows one can't write humor without them, Juliet Ashton says. And this is the onset of her quest for a story, an upright, strong, witty, and self-made female lead who would call off an engagement because her beloved books are packed away in a basement. I admire her. Who would be your favorite character? Is it by any chance Elizabeth or is it Juliet?
My favorite character would be a toss up between Juliet and, yes, Elizabeth. Juliet is so much fun. She's always just so happy and enjoyable in her letters. Very rarely is she down in the dumps, and her earnest letters with so much natural charm and honesty that not loving her never seems like an option. On the other hand, even though Elizabeth is never present physically, it's clear that most of the world of Guernsey revolved around her. From every description we get of her, we realize just how powerful of a personality she was and how much she impacted and bettered the lives of the people around them.
Those two were also my favorite characters, with honorable mentions for the gravitas-filled Sydney and the precocious Kit. So, thank you for vivid new perspectives you've introduced to us, and thank you again for being on the podcast. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society is the smoothest of books. As easily read as any other, and with superb language, concepts, and characters, it flows artfully, and its ability to astound is never in doubt. The epistolary form of writing complements its story perfectly, and the vividness of it is glorious. It is a romantic, funny, sad, and sharply written book, which is immensely rereadable. And now it's time for Bookbibuli Read Reco. The flow of this book, as I've mentioned already, is extremely good, and the vocabulary a perfect mix of simple and complex. Children above the age of 11 can read this book, but you do need a little patience with the letter writing format, which takes a bit getting used to. The main books to read before this are The Witch of the Blackbird Pond, Island of the Blue Dolphins, and The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. And the next book to continue on with would be Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. All in all, the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society is the rare book which manages to be quaint and life-changing at the same time. And it is definitely a must-read. So, better read, read better.